Al-Shabaab strikes again in Kenya. How the World Health Organization is combating the new Ebola outbreak in Liberia. And it's a royal day out for Princess Charlotte's christening. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Tonight, 14 people were killed in an overnight attack by Al-Shabaab gunmen on a residential complex in Kenya's northeastern town of Mandera. Officials say most of them were quarry workers and many died in their sleep. An Al-Shabaab military operations spokesperson told Reuters its gunmen targeted Christians in Tuesday's raid. It has in the past singled out non-Muslims to be executed. In December 2014, 36 quarry workers were killed in a similar raid in the same county. Al-Shabaab has made a series of deadly incursions into Kenya, which it says will continue until Nairobi withdraws its troops from an African Union force fighting the militants in their home base in Somalia. Now, for the latest on the Mandera attacks, journalist Ado Jubat joins us by phone from Garissa town. Ado, welcome to Africa 54. Ado, do you hear me? Ado Jubat. Ado, it looks like we are experiencing some problems there. So let's move on to West Africa. At least 25 people were killed Tuesday morning when a bomb went off, and then 3 gunmen opened fire on a crowd of civil servants on the outskirts of Nigeria's Zaria city in the northern state of Kaduna. A local radio journalist who was at the scene said the bomb went off at around 10 a.m. local time in Zaria's suburb of Gogaragua, where people were gathered to greet a newly appointed head administrator. There was no immediate claim of responsibility for that attack. Now, Burundi officials say they will discuss their response on Tuesday to a call by African nations to delay the presidential election by 2 weeks to July the 30th. Regional African states meeting in Tanzania Monday called for the July 15th presidential poll to be delayed to allow Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni to mediate. They also urged steps including disarming youth groups linked to political parties. Presidential spokesman Javier Abayeho says the meeting would include government officials and the Election Commission. However, he did not give a time or say if the government was considering delaying the vote. And now, for more, I'm joined by VOA's Edward Rwema, who has just returned from Burundi. Eddie, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you so much.
What a fabulous job you did while in Burundi.
Thank you so much.
We have some breaking news from Burundi. Can you update us on that?
Yeah, the breaking news we have is that the National Electoral Commission just announced a few minutes ago the results of the recently held legislative and communal elections. And from what we gather, the ruling parties here in the day of the day was able to garner 77 seats out of 100 seats.
That is like a majority.
It definitely a landslide for an elections that was only participated by the ruling party.
By the ruling party.
Yes.
Now, talk about the upcoming presidential election. The regional leaders are saying, well, postpone this to the 30th. But there's some technicalities here. Can you kind of give us some insight?
Yeah, of course, the technicalities involve the likely vacuum that would come in place if at all the elections would go beyond August 26. According to the Constitution, all the institutions must be in place by August 26th. And what it means that elections should take place at least 1 month before the deadline that is set by the Constitution. Mm-hmm. So what is happening right now, if the elections are to take place on July 30th, that means they only have a couple of days. And the other technicality that might come or might arise is if the winning candidate doesn't get the 50+1 votes. So that would mean there should be a runoff, a second run. And that would probably take us beyond. Outside that.
Now the question is, what are the regional leaders thinking when they're proposing this? They definitely, you would assume they understand that there are some of these constitutional issues to consider.
I assume they do, and like yesterday during the Heads of State Summit in Dar es Salaam, they called for a postponement for at least 2 weeks to create an enabling environment for all political parties to take part in these elections. Whether those 2 weeks are enough, it's something that is very debatable. We know that they set terms to have all the refugees returned. They set terms to have the ruling party's youth wing disarmed. They set terms to have the independent media opened. So whether this is going to be possible, it's something that...
Look, you were there. You were. Tell me, how many people are out of the country as refugees?
Right now, we are talking of over 140,000 refugees. So, and these are people, when I visited one of the camps in Tanzania, these are the people who are telling you that they're not going to come back unless something has changed, unless the government has withdrawn all the arms it has given to the youth wing in Imbonerakure. So whether the government is going to be able to do that, nobody knows. Because right now what the opposition is saying, instead of the government disarming the youth, they should bring in a neutral force to do that job.
But in any case, do we know how many of those youth have weapons and where they're to be found, and how you even begin to disarm them?
We don't know how many or how much arms is in the hands of the youth. Just a few weeks ago, when I spoke to the advisor to the president's office, Willie Nyamitwe, he told me that they've been able to at least get 100,000 weapons from people who had them illegally. So whether this process is going on and whether they're going to be able to do that is something that everybody is waiting to see. But again, the opposition says it's not possible for people who gave out weapons to be the ones to get those weapons out of the people.
Very quickly, from what you're hearing from the leadership in Bujumbura, does the government, the President Nkurunziza, seem to be really bothered by any of this?
When it comes to third-term issue and him withdrawing his candidacy, this is something that he's not going to take easily. And this is another thing, again, that is a major issue when it comes to the dialogue. So when they are invited for dialogue, the opposition is saying, before we say anything or before we discuss anything, he has to withdraw his candidacy. And again, the ruling party, up to now, they say they're not going to be bothered or they're not going to withdraw that candidacy.
Doesn't appear like it's going to happen. But we'll keep watching developments in Burundi. Thanks a lot, Eddie, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Well, Eddie Rema of the Voice of America. Now, right here in the United States, South Carolina's state Senate voted Monday to remove the Civil War-era Confederate flag that has flown over parts of the state capital for more than 50 years. The push to remove the Confederate flag from the State House grounds came after photos emerged of the alleged gunman in the Charleston church shooting, Dylan Roof, holding a small version of the Confederate flag in various settings, including the site of a slave plantation. Those who want to get rid of the flag say no one can escape the fact that it once stood for a fight to keep slavery legal and is a constant reminder of white supremacy. Opponents of the measure say the banner is not about slavery and racism, but Southern history, pride, and family heritage. Now, since U.S. President Barack Obama took office in 2009, more than a dozen mass shootings have occurred, prompting the president to call for calm. The most recent one, a shooting by a young white man, killed 9 blacks in a South Carolina church. In part 1 of our special series, VOA's Caroline Presutti takes a look at the president and his difficulty in talking about race and guns.
In his 2 terms as president,
this morning, we woke up to news of a tragedy.
Barack Obama
Any shooting is troubling.
Has dealt with at least 12 mass shootings.
So our hearts are broken today.
Lately, it's about shootings and racism.
None of us can or should expect a transformation in race relations overnight.
But that's what some expected from the country's first African-American president.
Have water.
Jonna Hawkins will vote for the first time in the next presidential election.
People thought that when Obama got in office, he was for the black people and for the black people only. And, you know, but in actuality, how much has he done for the black people? Or
Hawkins lives less than 3 kilometers from where Baltimore rioted over the death of a black man while in police custody. A month and a half later in South Carolina, a white man shot and killed 9 blacks inside a Charleston church. A 2014 study found that while the divide is lessening, the number of gun-related deaths of African Americans is double that of whites.
America was built on racism in many ways.
Sociologist Chris Marsh says these days it's tougher to spot racism.
We moved from very overt kind of racism to covert racism, which is dangerous and insidious because it's harder to call it out, it's harder to acknowledge it, and the other side of that, it's easier to not acknowledge it.
Like Dylan Roof, who posted his racist views in an internet manifesto. But some say Roof's goal of a race war failed when people of every color came together after the mass murder.
I don't think President Obama alone can fix race. And I certainly don't think President Obama alone can fix guns.
Cornell Brooks is president of the NAACP, the nation's largest and oldest civil rights organization. He says the solution lies with ordinary people.
It's not enough for us to talk at a kind of grand theory level. We have to get down to the level of battles. How do we address bias or bigotry in the school system? What specific ways can we address that? What specific ways can we address employment challenges?
Some say it starts with the push to be color blind. Others say that erases diversity. And instead, Americans should be color fair, which starts with each individual. Carolyn Presutti, VOA News, Washington.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa54. And check out all headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Well, coming up, rebuilding after the Ebola epidemic. Stay with us.
This is Greenbeat for a healthier planet.
I think that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree, wrote poet Joyce Kilmer. And while trees are indeed lovely, they are also key to life on Earth.
They provide critical ecosystem services, such as regulating the climate.
But, says Rachel Peterson of the World Resources Institute, the Earth is rapidly losing its forest.
We're losing forests around 50 soccer fields per minute on average.
Peterson says land use change and deforestation in Indonesia, for example, account for 80% of its emissions. While the numbers appear dire, the good news, says Peterson, is a growing commitment by corporations to take the issue seriously.
Nestle and Mars and Wilmar, companies that produce some of our favorite chocolates and candies, commit to zero deforestation in their supply chains.
Peterson also notes there's been a recent decline in the rates of deforestation in Brazil's Amazon, possibly due to satellite monitoring technology that she says helps governments make better decisions on forest policies. I'm Rebecca Ward for VOA's Green Beat.
Well, another day, another stock sell-off in China. From New York, VOA's Alexis Christophorous joins us with the very latest on that and the rest of the day's business news. Alexis.
Vincent, despite China's best efforts to stabilize its market, the Shanghai Composite dropped another 1.3% today. Now, of course, guaranteed sell-off is to halt trading altogether, and that's exactly what some companies have done. A quarter of all companies listed on China's mainland exchanges have now suspended trading. And the clock is ticking for an agreement on Iran's nuclear program. If world powers and Iran do come to an agreement, it would give oil-rich Iran access to world markets and provide other nations with a guarantee that Iran won't produce nuclear weapons. Of course, the possibility of millions of barrels of oil flooding an already oversupplied market is putting pressure on oil prices. A restart of a key oil terminal in Libya is not helping matters, and crude is down another 3% today to around $50 a barrel. That's after plunging about 8% on Monday. And some analysts predict we could see crude test a 6-year low of $42 a barrel by sometime this summer. Vincent?
Alexis, the Eurozone leaders are holding an emergency summit in Brussels at this very hour to discuss the next steps for Greece after the country voted no to new austerity measures. Any news there?
We're waiting for some headlines to come out of the summit, which, as you say, is happening right now. Greece's prime minister has been given just hours to come up with a proposal to keep his country in the euro, and the pressure continues to build on the Greek leader after German Chancellor Angela Merkel said time is run out. So the European Central Bank moved to tighten the access of Greek banks to emergency money.
Now, are the U.S. markets reacting to the news of the day, the business news of today?
Well, for U.S. investors, China and Greece are actually taking a back seat to earnings season. That kicks off tomorrow. And stocks are relatively lower here as traders brace for what they believe earnings later this year.
Okay, thank you. And great reporting from New York. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Alexis Christopher is reporting live from New York City. Well, joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu on recovering from the Ebola blow. Lino.
Hello, Vincent. While the World Health Organization's Assistant Director General for Health Systems and Innovation, Marie-Paul Kearney, says donors have pledged $1.4 billion of an estimated $2.1 billion over the next 2 years to help Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone rebuild their battered health services after the Ebola epidemic. She says full recovery in the three countries will not happen if the health systems are not strengthened. The re-emergence of Ebola in Liberia last week has, however, stoked fears that it may take longer than expected to defeat the epidemic. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon will host an international Ebola recovery conference in New York on Friday to raise additional funds for reconstruction. The WHO has been widely criticized for its response to the Ebola epidemic, which killed more than 11,000 people in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Now, in a report released today titled The Global Tobacco Epidemic 2015, the World Health Organization says not enough governments make full use of tobacco taxes to dissuade people from smoking. The United Nations Health Agency says that one person dies from tobacco-related disease every 6 seconds or so, equivalent to about 6 million people a year. That number is forecast to rise to more than 8 million people a year by 2030 unless strong measures are taken to control what the WHO calls a tobacco epidemic. WHO Director General Margaret Chan says in the report that raising taxes on tobacco products is one of the most effective and cost-effective ways to reduce consumption of products that kill while also generating substantial revenue, end quote. The WHO recommends that at least 75% of the price of a pack of cigarettes should be taxed. Joining us in the studio for more on the subject is Joshua Kialo, Africa Program Director for the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. Mr. Kialo, it is so good to have you back on Africa 54.
Thank you for having me, Lenore.
Now, we heard about this report, the new report by WHO. What is your reaction? Do you think that increasing taxes on cigarettes is the step on the right direction?
Absolutely not. The Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, we fully agree with WHO that it's a resounding call for governments around the world to implement the proven measures for preventing tobacco death, which is the leading cause of preventable death around the world. And the most effective way to do this among governments is to raise taxes. It has several advantages. It's a win-win. One, it raises revenue, it reduces consumption, it saves life, while it is very cost-effective to implement. So we do absolutely agree with WHO that the time to do it is now, and do it urgently.
So a step to the right direction, but when we talk about raising revenues, among other things, isn't it also good for these companies that produce cigarettes in terms of their revenue?
The governments, the tobacco industry will always argue that raising tobacco taxes will increase illicit trade, among other arguments. That's always a fallacy. The truth is, if you look at a country like Brazil, they have one of the world leading producers of tobacco leaf. They have increased taxes over the years. And between 1989 and 2010, Brazil reduced tobacco consumption by almost 49%, through effective tobacco taxation. So again, we come back to the key point that the most proven method of reducing tobacco consumption, saving life, is tobacco taxes. And yet, among the measures that the WHO recommends, it's a list that has been implemented. And so the report is saying, let's increase taxes by at least by 75% of the retail price. It's a win-win for the government. We are urging governments to take action now.
Now, there are some people that argue that, listen, smoking a cigarette is not like drinking alcohol where you can become impaired, your judgment can become impaired. You know, this is one's responsibility. It's their health that is being impacted. It's their money that they're spending. So why is there such a big emphasis on the need to reduce smoking?
Because the science is clear. The evidence is overwhelming that, as you said yourself at the beginning, in the 20th century, tobacco killed 100 million people. By the 21st century, it will kill 1 billion people. 1 billion people. So what we are saying to the governments is there are measures that have been proven. One, warn people about the consequences of tobacco use. Prevent people from exposure to tobacco use. 100% smoke-free policy should be in place. Put graphic health warnings of at least 60-65% above on a cigarette pack so that people know the consequences of tobacco use. And again, as the WHO report says, increase taxes. The governments have a responsibility. They signed the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. They ratified it. It's an obligation. And it's a proven method of saving lives. And we are urging governments to take action now.
Now, the campaign for tobacco-free kids, why is it important to put an emphasis on kids, on youth?
Because I think for us it's about saving generations. Of course, tobacco use affects all generations. But I think we have an obligation as a society, as governments, to put in place measures that will protect everybody in the society, beginning with children. Tobacco kills, causes disability and diseases. It has deadly effects on those that primarily smoke. It also has effects through a secondary exposure to smoking to innocent children, to family members. So at the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, we are saying the time to act is now, especially in Africa, which we cover, and where the rates are still low compared to the rest of the world.
And before we wrap up, what you mentioned Africa, what are you doing in Africa specifically?
We are working with governments across Africa to put in place laws and measures that are compliant with the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, to pass laws to prevent tobacco death, to implement those laws to protect populations, and to take the measures that are within the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, as I said, on around 100% smoke-free policies, graphic health warnings, ban on tobacco advertising and promotion, and also tackling the tobacco industry head-on and stopping them from interfering in the policy-making process of the government. But again, my key message is back to the report from World Health Organization, is now is a time for governments in Africa to increase taxes, raise revenue, drive down consumption, save life, protect health. It's a win-win measure for the African governments, and the time for African governments to act is now.
Thank you so much, Joshua Kyalo, for joining us today.
Thank you, Lenore.
And that was Joshua Kyalo. He is Africa Program Director for the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. And that's our Africa Health Report for today. Back to you, Vincent.
Well, and thank you very much for joining us today, Lenore. Be sure to watch for Lenore Madu every Tuesday and Thursday for the latest health news in Africa, right here on Africa 54. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, casual royal style at a princess christening. We'll be right back.
Tunataka Obama, I'm going to invite the chairperson of the Kenya Christian Professionals Forum, Mrs. Ann.
Vraiment, la délégation, je voulais juste vous remercier l'engagement.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. The world got its first glimpse of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge with both of their children on tiny Princess Charlotte's christening day. Charlotte was cheered on as she and her family left St. Mary Magdalene Church after the christening. The 9-week-old princess was pushed in a baby carriage by her mother Catherine, the Duchess of Cornwall, and flanked by her father, Prince William, and brother, Prince George. All four royals were, as always, dressed to the nines. Well, next up, a travel trend not even we saw coming. Now, a record number of visitors are heading to Los Angeles as the desert city continues to reinvent itself after the 2008 recession. Even though tourism figures are climbing, gambling is no longer the main attraction, with a new breed of travelers opting for a different style of entertainment instead. Hotel occupancy rates in 2014 were just shy of 90%. Most visitors are from the United States, but international guests are increasing and made up of 19% of tourists in 2014. Instead of gambling, many visitors are choosing to spend their money elsewhere at Michelin-starred restaurants, cocktail lounges, clubs, big-name concerts, and elaborate shows. Well, and in other travel trends, one of Vancouver's luxury hotels is determined to become the most eco-friendly accommodation in the city. Visitors to Fairmont Waterfront Hotel can visit the hotel's rooftop herb garden, be apiary, and dine on locally sourced sustainable seafood dishes. The hotel's commitment to sustainability even extends to what's known as an eco-meat program, which allows event planners to keep their ecological footprint low while still staging meetings. Planners can choose disposable-free service, local and organic menus. Leftover food can be given to local charities. And that is what is trending today. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings, Today Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night.
Thank you.